Well, it's lovely to be here. Absolutely fantastic to be joined by Tabetha Newman, who is our lead researcher. She's an external consultant working quite closely at JISC. And what we want to do together is to share with you some of the work that we've been doing over the last 2 years, looking at the digital experiences of international students. So what we're going to be covering today are actually 3 phases of this research. I'm going to be talking about the first 2 phases, so where we were shining a light on the digital experiences of international students who physically come into the UK to study with us in our higher education institutions. And Tabitha's going to be picking up the story in terms of where we are right now with our live data collection around TNE, transnational education students and the staff, and support them. What we want to do is to then perhaps leave you with a few prompts for discussion at the end. Of course, we can get other questions as we go along. So, as I say, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the first couple of phases. What I thought would be useful for you to hear from us to begin with is something of the rationale behind why JISC decided to take this close look at international students and their digital experiences. There are a number of reasons for this, but as many of you in the room will be aware, JISC is a member organisation. And as such, it is absolutely our duty at JISC to be listening to our members, their experiences, their requirements, their needs, their observations within their learning and research practices, so that we can address those research, leadership, data collection and guides and resources. And what our institutions told us as we were coming out of the pandemic, which is when this work started just over 2 years ago, was that the pandemic had absolutely shone a light on the digital experiences of international students. And arguably, it shone a light on all of our digital experiences, but for international students, there were challenges around digital access and there were challenges around digital pedagogy. So in terms of those expectations that UK higher education institutions were placing on the use of digital within teaching. So what we wanted to do was to dig deeper than we were able to do through our digital experience student insight surveys, through being able to really start to explore how digital is experienced in international students' home country, and then how they cope with the transition into UK higher education from a perspective. So, as we were looking at international students in the UK, so the first 2 phases of work, in terms of the methodology for our own data collection, we combined surveys with focus groups. And as you can see from the slide here, we're delighted to be working with 14 different higher education institutions across the UK in order to be able to disseminate our surveys and to help us organise some focus group activity. We attracted over 2,000 student responses to the survey, and we got to speak to, Tabetha got to speak to 150 students. And then phase 3, which is live at the moment, also sees another anonymous survey, actually more than anonymous survey, because we are also bringing in the voice of staff in the TNE experience. Tabetha will talk a little bit more about some early findings. And just to let you know that we are due to report twice this year, in the summer and again in the autumn. I thought you'd be interested to see who the institutions are that we've worked with over the phases to date. So if you see your institution there and you're interested to know who might be working on this within your institution, if you've not heard about it so far, then do let us know and we can do that. So the first phase was essentially an extensive literature review. There was also talk to other sector organisations who have an interest in international students. We obviously have heard about UKEYS already today, but we talked to UKI, the British Council, UAA, France MG, BOILA, for example. And what we found from the literature was that international students experience something called digital shock. And that digital shock, when it's combined with learning shock, cultural shock more generally, then it can really negatively impact international students as they come into the UK in terms of their performance, in terms of to settle. And in that first phase, in order to try and understand what might be causing some of these digital shocks, we turned our attention to the Network Readiness Index. And if you haven't already come across this, I would strongly recommend that you take a look, given your interest in international education. It provides a global ranking of countries based on 58 different metrics, which then constitutes this ranking of digital maturity. Would very much recommend that you take a look at that. So that helped us to start to understand the differences in the civil digital infrastructure that might impact experience for students. And then in the second phase, this was our opportunity to then hear from students in our UK institutions as to what the nature of those digital shocks might be. So if you're interested in looking at our findings along with the recommendations that we then shared back out to the sector as to how to improve the student digital experience, definitely it's doing. So I've got very long to run through our findings and recommendations. So what I thought I would do is just give you some very high-level recommendations. This is kind of scraping the surface, isn't it, Tabetha, of all the recommendations that are in the report. But what you'll see in the report is that they're organised by different stages in the student journey. So just to give you a flavour of what's there, one of the key issues we found for students was that their expectations had not been very well managed before coming into UK higher education. So there's some examples on the screen there of ways in which this could be improved, areas in which it would be really helpful for students to get a better clarity on how they might be engaging with tech on their courses, as well as some broader learning grey boundaries being what we're going to ask us about in questions later. One of the things students were crying out for was some kind of really clear map or overview of all the digital technology that they were likely to be encountering. What would be owned, what would be provided by the university, what would be perhaps offered through a third party, and so where there might be some restrictions of access. And then thirdly, and really importantly, what might they still have access to once they've graduated, particularly in terms of what they might be able to access back in their home country. International students, as well you know, rely very heavily on lecture capture. But most of the students, especially those for whom English is not their first language, said that the quality of those recordings was not good. And so particularly where subject terminology had not been amended within the recordings. There was also really a strong message around comfort levels with technology and how this differed across the different countries who were represented in our data set. So there's a call here really to the sector to start to think about where students might be in terms of their comfort levels with different types of technology and engagement in live lectures, and to think of ways in which that can be developed. And the fifth one I wanted to share with you, just to give you a sense again as to kind of how far we go in our recommendations. We move into the strategic space and really a call to institutions to not just situate the needs of international students with regard to their digital experience within an international strategy or in a digital strategy or in the teaching and learning or an EDI strategy, but to have representation across those strategies. So before I hand over to Tabetha, just to let you know that there are 5 short thematic briefing papers also available via our web pages. These are short pieces of content that really help to shine a light on different aspects of the work that we've done in phase 2. I'm going to call out 2 in particular. The first one because it brings together all of our recommendations as a checklist. A really practical guide for institutions to take a look at, consider the extent to which they're supporting students' experience. And the 5th one, because it was our opportunity to share back with the sector some fantastic examples of where institutions have taken our findings, looked at the recommendations, improved what they're doing to support international students with their digital experience. And we were able to compare some of those examples practice. And here are just a few of them. So it's really important at JISC that when we respond to a need, we undertake that research, we share it back out with the sector, but then we also find out what happens next. And I think that's the really useful. Tabetha.
Thank you very much. You can sit down. You don't have to stand in the corner, unless you want to. Thank you. So thanks for joining us today. I know it's been a long day, but I really appreciate having this time with you to share what we're doing in the TNE space. So this is our third year of this research, as Elizabeth has explained, and we're looking now at the experiences of students and the staff who support them when they are registered in UK, but they are learning fully in other countries, in host countries. And this research is very much not just about online learning. It's really easy to think that the digital experience is one which is associated predominantly with an online learning provision. But digital is involved in a whole host of different areas of DNA delivery, from marketing, recruitment, global data transfer, issues around cybersecurity, certainly issues around software licensing and accessing of ebooks and e-journal. These are crucial things for us to consider and us to provide advice to the sector about. And in terms of the student learning experience, again, digital is used widely, both in live and asynchronous learning contexts. And there's an assumption, as Elizabeth has said, that the civil digital infrastructure of countries are globally homogenous, that digital access issues are similar, and that the pedagogic practice in any one country is pretty much interchangeable with others. And that's absolutely not the case. Context, digital civil infrastructure is very, very different. And we really need to better understand that, because that builds the way a student in a host country has experienced and expects digital to be used in their course. And that they will take those expectations into their teaching and learning experience within their institution. So for this work, we are looking essentially at three things. We're looking at access issues, and there will be things like accessing Wi-Fi. In some countries, Wi-Fi is pretty much impossible to get hold of, and you'll be working on a cellular data network. You need to be aware of that. We're looking at expected devices that the students are expected to own. Do they have them? How do they get access to them? As well as things like software, e-journals, other learning resources that may hang from a VLE, but may not necessarily be accessible within that list. We're looking at digital teaching and learning practice. I've spoken about that a minute ago. And we're also looking at skills development. So the digital capabilities, both of the student to take full advantage of the learning opportunities that we're providing, and also of the staff in both the UK and the host country who are facilitating that learning experience. So a quick background, let's take us back to UK transnational education provision. So we know that from the last recorded data, there are over 600,000 registered TNE students studying at 173 institutions in the UK, with Asia being the largest host region. Now, that said, over the last 2 or 3 years, there have been a number of countries that have really very, very rapid growth in their interest in UK-based TNE provision. So countries like Nepal, Tibet, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, these are countries that are very recently gaining a lot of interest as host countries. Partly facilitated by new educational alliances as well. So we've got the first branch campus opening in India. So we've got a whole mix of different ways of providing transnational education. And what we're really trying to do is then take the student perspective. So it's all very well having these terms that are registered, and officially in the legalese. Is it a validated partnership? Is it a franchise? Those kinds of things. But from the student perspective, how are they experiencing their learning? Because there's such a variety. They may well be learning fully online and learning on their own. They may be going to regional support centres. They may be experiencing being with their peers, but having a Zoom call with a UK-based lecturer. They may have, so a number of different opportunities there. So What I think is really important for us to say is that TNE numbers vary hugely at an institutional level. So whilst on average 1 in 6 UK students is a TNE student, you'll see here these are the institutions that are participating in our research at the moment. The green portion is the proportion of their TNE students, undergraduate plus postgraduate taught. The blue is their international student cohort coming in country to study, and the red is their UK domiciled student population. So you can see there is no typical UK university, and that the proportion of your TNE students really does have strategic implications at an institutional level in terms of how you are going to deliver your. So this is what our research partners said that they want us they want to participate in this research for these reasons. Yes, they want to learn about the digital experience of transnational education staff and students. They want a more nuanced understanding of that. They want to identify opportunities for improvement. They want to enhance student retention and success, and build networks with other universities, because there is no publicly available transnational education student feedback data in the UK. In the UK, our students have to complete the NSS, and there are a number of different places where we share publicly available student feedback data. But for TNE students at the moment, that isn't the case. And this is a report that came out in December by Professor Carton for HEPI, and one of his key 3 recommendations is that we start creating feedback opportunities through remote surveying. So our research is very timely in this space. If anyone is from an institution, there is still some capacity to design this work. So what have we done very quickly? We have these 21 universities involved. They have identified 40 different instances of TNE provision over 16 different countries. So those are in this illustration here. And so we're on track to reach about 3,000 staff and about 75,000 students locally. Now, you all know that not all of them are going to complete those surveys, and obviously a small minority will participate in focus groups. But it's a really nice reach that we've got in this work. And I'm going to end with a couple of slides that just show you what we know at the moment. So these institutions have fed back to us and said, this is what we know is an issue at the moment. In terms of access, the big issue is access to licensed software, to ebooks, e-journals. That is a known problem. I'm speaking to students in other countries who are definitely saying, yeah, that is an issue. We're supposed to have access to this book. We don't have access to this book, so we've just quietly gone and paid. That is a problem. In terms of digital teaching and learning practice, perhaps unsurprisingly, both for students and staff, the issue is associated with generative AI, how to use it appropriately, how to mitigate issues around that, and how to understand its cultural acceptance. The other thing we're saying here is also UK-based assessment practice is an issue, and that needs careful explaining. And also the cultural created teaching materials. For example, I spoke to someone yesterday, one of their students in Tibet, ended up with a knock on the door of the authorities asking to speak with him down at the local precinct station, because he had been asked as one of his assignments to look online for a certain theme that was then picked up by the authorities. So we really need to consider these things and report back so that the sector in the UK can support and look after their TA students. So I'm going to end by inviting you to share your thoughts here via this Padlet. There's a QR code. I know we'll obviously take questions as well, but we would be really interested to know whether or not you have any issues related to access or teaching and learning in different countries. And also whether you have any thoughts around the digital capabilities of students and staff in any context. So please do share your thoughts on this if you have any, and we'll certainly bring those into our report. Thank you.